Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm going to walk you through Canada's green economies and probably to discuss a little bit about maybe some myths and misleading information around the whole concepts of climate change, cap and trade, just the idea of the dynamics of an economy in terms of trying to transform it. There's a lot of misleading information out there, both sides, whether it's the left view or the right view. I'm going to clarify the overall economic conditions as well as the impact of government policies. Now, this is one perspective. Green technologies is not deemed to be the only perspective. I would encourage people to go out to different websites to get their view, to get the perspective of what corporations are doing, what government policies is, and just to look at the mandates, what's driving the push. Just a little brief bio about myself, and basically I'm a CPA CGA by trade. I've got 25 years of experience. Now this gives you an idea of the agenda. I'm actually going to look at the characteristics and give you an overview of the economy. I'll talk about Canada's economy in general, and then I'll get into components of green technology. Now the green technology really is moving away from a carbon footprint. So basically we're trying to say we don't want to get involved with anything that involves with CO2, and that's really what we're getting into. The characteristics of it, when you start to get into it, it's everything from looking at wind, looking at sustainable practices around water. It's looking at the whole dynamics of the ecosystem, and that's something that you need to watch out for in terms of what technologies can do to help protect the ecosystem. Now this gives you an idea of the different components to it, and if you look at it, most of everything is related to power generation, as well as looking at different ways to protect the food and water supply. Now, this is where the misconception is in Canada. The clean energy market itself is a $44 billion market. Okay, it's growing about 8 to 10% a year. So, in other words, each year it grows about $4 billion. Now, if you look at it in the grand scheme of things, yes, it's an important part. But our GDP in Canada is basically $2 trillion. So it's 2% of GDP. So as much as you hear premiers and everybody talk about it, you cannot transform an economy overnight. It takes decades to transform it. So to kind of push agendas to go to a carbon-based economy in 3 years isn't going to happen. And that's the myth that government's trying to sell. It's not going to happen. Second thing is never discuss. It's got a role in terms of looking at key programs like sustainable development technology. It has an ability to kind of look at moving technology forward, but we need to be very careful here. Taking technology from incubation to market takes time, and that's never discussed. Now, I want to look at the GDP issues here. So, in general, about 30% of Canada's economy is goods producing. So if we say that we're going to go for $44 billion clean technology, that means basically we're going to replace a good chunk of the good producing area with clean technology. Well, that would take decades. That could take 20 years to do that replacement. In the meantime, clean technology also needs a certain amount of carbon in it in order to be produced. And that's something I'll talk about further along. The second thing is, 2/3 of the economy in Canada is driven by consumer spending. If you bring in policies like cap and trade or push clean agendas, what's going to do is it's going to likely add 10% to the cost of goods you produce. So if you buy a cell phone, or if you buy a car, or you buy food, it will add about 8 to 10% there because it gets added along the way to the supply chain. Let's look at wind power. Wind power itself requires raw materials, fabrication, and delivery. It's got carbon all over that. So why doesn't government discuss that? Okay, it's not wind power. It's not clean technology until actually it's built. Now, before that, it has got carbon all through it. That's not discussed. Solar panels. At the end day, when it's on the buildings, it's clean technology. Before that, it's raw material. Has to go through a process before it becomes solar panels installed. That's not discussed. Look at battery storage. Battery storage like vanadium, lithium are key things to storage. Problem is, they're highly toxic materials. Their tailing ponds are very bad. And therefore, when you start looking at these things, you may be talking about relieving CO2, but what are you doing to the land and the water? That's not discussed. And if you want good examples, do a Google search when you look at rare metals and look what's happening in China and some of the communities where they've extracted. Look at the water supply in the land. These materials are extremely toxic. Now, microgrids themselves are basically mini little power systems. Mini little power systems, if you look at it, I see steel, I see copper wiring in there, I see silicon. So when you move this stuff around as a grid, there's carbon all over that. How are you going to make a microgrid with plastic? And how is that plastic going to be made? Made with petrochemicals. So this is where government is not being clearly understood or clearly making their statements. This isn't about climate change. This is about pushing their own Agenda 21. And I would encourage you to go read about Agenda 21 because that's what's driving this. We've looked at wind, we looked at solar, we looked at batteries, and we looked at microgrid. Where do you not see carbon on it? It's all over that. Carbon taxation and pricing. This is a way governments say, I want to cap CO2 emissions. Good attempt to do it. The problem is, in Europe, the cap and trade market's been fraught with fraud. Second thing is, the largest polluters are just going to go to the market and buy more credits. It's not going to encourage them to do things. Second point, there's no clear link with cap and trade and reducing emissions. All it is, in general, is a tax grab by government to mask it, and it isn't revenue neutral. Okay, when you talk about the supply chain, which is very complex, anywhere carbon is part of that, the costs get added to it. And as I mentioned to it, it's not impossible to see 8 to 10% added to goods. So if you buy a new cell phone and it's $150, it's not unheard of to see down the road it'll cost you $15 more. Look at your food prices. Your food budgets are extremely expensive. It's not unheard to see another 8 to 10% there on top of everything else you face. So this is nice how government says, I'm all about reducing CO2. But what they don't tell you is what's that cost going to be overall. They understate it because they're not looking at all angles of supply chain, how the costs flow. They're making a political statement based on their Agenda 21. And that's a dangerous game here because an economy is critical. If you want jobs, you have to grow the economy. It has to be a balanced approach to policy. That's not what you're getting with governments right now. What you're getting is a pro-agenda about climate change masked that they're trying to do something for it. Now, do we need to do something to protect things? Yes, there needs to be a balanced approach. But putting cap trade and carbon taxation don't do anything. And that's the critical factor that is ignored by mainstream media as well as government. The other thing that's a misconception here is corporation sustainability. Most corporations have done a significant improvement in their footprint on the environment and on carbon. They've looked at alternatives in manufacturing, alternative products to manage that. They've also retrofitted their office buildings, warehouses, mining operation, production facility with solar panels, and other ways to minimize any use of like diesel power or anything else. So that's being done. They're reducing the waste going to landfill. That's part of it. They're reducing elimination paper. No need to print a lot of paper because you can go to PDF files. So that's the other misconception is corporations are doing something sustainable. You can go and do a Google search. Do Intel. Look at the mining companies and say, look at their sustainability reports. That'll tell you what their practices are. Again, why isn't government talking about that? Because it's easy to put everything to say that's doom and gloom. Why? Because doom and gloom allows companies to get government money. If you tell somebody it's all bad, guess what? Government's willing to throw money at that. And that's critical to understand what drives the process. I have several other videos that you may be interested here. I've looked at Paris climate change. I looked at the Ontario cap and trade. Looked at clean tech market. And I've also looked at other government policies. I'm not here to condemn everything done. What I'm here to say is we need to be very careful when we come up with policies. We can't go too far left, we can't go too far right. Most governments make the mistake of ruling from the center. And it's very critical to have a balanced approach. If you want sustainable jobs and a strong economy, it has to be a balanced approach. Do we need to do things on the environment? Yes. Do we need to protect it a bit more? Yes. But is it all doom and gloom? No. So the critical factor driving this is people need to understand and ask questions. Why are they pushing a certain agenda? Why are they doing that? That's the questions you do. You didn't elect them to push this agenda. You elected them to represent your interest. And if 10% of the people believe there's climate change, and they're spending all that time, then they're not representing the 90% that do not want to see these outlandish policies. And that's something that, as you go forward in life, you need to kind of address that. Thank you.